So finally, in 2002, a peace agreement was brokered in Sri Lanka after 400 years of ongoing civil war. There was finally something to celebrate. There was finally something to work with. A man named A.T. Ariyaratne, a school teacher, an elder, and a man who was considered to be the Gandhi of Sri Lanka. He called his followers together. There were more than 600,000 of them. And he asked them to come together to support this new peace treaty. And his people, used to being called into action to do things like build wells, build schools, they came together at his call, at Ari's call. And he addressed his people, both those that were gathered there and his nation, Sri Lanka. And he said, I won't quote it exactly, but this is the essence. It's taken us 500 years to get here. I propose that it will take us 500 years to get out. He described to his people the history, the primary causes of their conflict. They had gone through 400 years of colonialism, 500 years of infighting and struggle between the Hindus and the Muslims and the Buddhists, hundreds of years of economic disparity. It took us all this time, he said, to create this suffering. Why would we think that it would take any less time to find a way out of it? And so he proposed to them a 500-year plan. First, 500-year plan. First, it's surprising, isn't it? We hear those words and it's like, well, how is that possible? First, he said several years of ceasefire and 10 years dedicated to rebuilding our roads, our schools, our infrastructure. He said then 25 years of programs to learn each other's languages, to learn each other's culture. 50 years of specific projects to right economic injustices and bring the people back together. And then he said, and then we repeat, and we repeat, and we repeat. He proposed that every 100 years, a council of elders be called together to look back on the work that they had done, and to identify how the plan was going. I heard this story from a Buddhist thinker and speaker, Jack Kornfield. He said, Ari is not worried about the next election. He is not worried that he will die before his plan is fulfilled. His is a timeless vision, a sacred intention. He is simply living freely in the middle of it all, planting seeds of goodness and wisdom. Like Ari, when we find the middle way, we can act not out of aversion or grasping, but as a labor of love. Our actions are a product of our vision and our compassion, even when the immediate result is uncertain, not visible. So this month we've been talking about the theme of integrity, and it kind of started me down this path of thinking for myself, where does my own integrity live? And as I was unpacking this thing, I was thinking about the forces that play in our lives, in these very human lives. This sense of being driven towards something, or maybe away from something. And this sense of being drawn, this sort of much more gentle impulse that can and does happen in our lives. And I think that this story of Ariyaratne and his 500-year peace plan is a really perfect encapsulation of what integrity can mean. It's responsive and it's loving, and it doesn't demand anything, really. It holds it all like this. It's not defined by anybody's timelines or pressures. And so my question for us as we look at what drives us, what draws us, is to ask ourselves this question about how can we create in our own lives our own peace plans, our peace plans for ourselves, for our families, for the future generations to come, our own 500-year peace plans. Another way to put it is, how do we begin to recognize the energies that move through our lives and create lives of integrity based upon the best of our impulses, rather than reacting to cycles of violence or oppression that happen within us and in the world around us? I'm making my claim this morning that that sense of being drawn versus being driven, it feels different. We can tell. And it feels different, not just in our own bodies, but in the world. It matters. The definition from Webster's dictionary says of a person that driven means relentlessly compelled by the need to accomplish a goal. Alternatively, it can also be said to mean, in our culture, very hardworking and ambitious. Relentlessly driven and compelled. So driven is a compulsion. It's relentless in its pursuit, and we admire drive in this culture. How many times have we said, oh yes, he's very driven, she's very driven. They're heading on to good things. They've got all this drive. It's a culture of unattainable perfection. It's a culture of supremacy. We think that drive gets things done, but the cost is what we're living in right now. As Ari would tell it, 500 years of drive and the compulsion has led to the degradation of our soils, our waters, our air, our peoples. It's led to hierarchies, racism, sexism, better than youism. And these outcomes on a broad scale can only be addressed by us in our day-to-day lives if we commit to planting seeds of a different sort, if we commit to our own 500 years of peace. So I was thinking about this difference between driven and drawn as I was preparing for today, and I thought of a few ways to describe it. And these may work for you and they may not. We can talk about it after the service. Being driven leaves us very little sense of choice or autonomy. It is relentless compulsion. Being drawn is expansive. You have all the choices in the world available to you. Being driven feels exhausting, draining, as though the energy is being sucked from you and your experiences. Being drawn feels life-affirming, life-giving, and energizing. Being driven involves living up to something, the expectations of others, parents, bosses, teachers, siblings, famous people we've never met. Being drawn involves living into something, following your heart, following the still, small voice within. Being driven means never feeling you've arrived, because there is always another benchmark, another deadline, another expectation to aim for. Being drawn means living comfortably within your own skin, owning yourself and your choices, and allowing yourself to say yes when the time is right for you, not a moment before. Being driven is busy. It's rush, pressure, heat, impulse, and reaction. Being drawn means steady progress inspired by love, curiosity, and grace. It's cool, calm, unhurried. It's responsive to light. Being driven involves some kind of violence, a violence of spirit, a violence in relationship or expression, violence or combustion, force. Being drawn is like the unfolding of a flower as it reaches toward light, natural, gentle, peaceful, affirming. I think that part of the reason that I'm talking to you about these things from the pulpit this morning is that I'm making these distinctions in my own life right now. Like I'm feeling it happen right now, this shift from living a life based upon being driven by something and shifting my attention toward this sense of being drawn. And I know for a lot of us, January is a time of resolutions, New Year's resolutions. I don't really do that, but this year I made for myself a set of vows. And just like every vow, right, I'll break them 1,000 times. But here are my vows, and I want to share these with you too because I really like them. And you're welcome to have them. Okay, so my first vow is that I live into my own authority with authenticity. My authority in my life with authenticity. My second vow is that I vow to say true things with kindness and compassion. Third, I'm vowing to devote my life to prayer, which as a Unitarian Universalist is a really interesting thing. But as you guys know, I've been in the hospital for the last 4 months, and I can tell you that I have felt the transformative nature of prayer, and I want more of it. Devote my life to prayer. And my fourth vow is that I experience everything that happens, every experience in my life, as God's, or the universe's, the Creator's direct dealing with my soul. And I take this fourth vow because so many things in life have an opportunity. We have the opportunity to feel like it's senseless or like we're victims of circumstance. And my need to grow in my own integrity has led me to choose to see everything that comes up in my life as an opportunity to learn something different, something new. Now, I know that I'm not going to do these vows perfectly. As I said, we break our vows 1,000 times, but it's my 500-year peace plan. It's the seeds that I'm choosing to plant in my own life. Because I think that it's possible to experience something richer and more profound than just accomplishing goals, which is where I had been oriented for so long. Checking the next box, getting the next gold star. So very vulnerable to share all of this with you all. But I was thinking about, in prepping for today too, last week's Wild and Precious Lives, and you could hear the difference through the lifetime as people shifted. It's like, our little guy who is in, 9 or 10, and his focus was so beautiful on family. And then we kind of like, I want to achieve things. I want to gain things. I want to make my mark. And that's beautiful. It's perfect. I think that's what maturation looks like. I think that's what a lifetime looks like. Ecclesiastes would tell us that to everything there's a season. Would you like me to read it to you? I've got it here. For everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what's been planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. It's hard to reconcile with those things. Some of those I can feel in myself, like, no, there's no time for hate. But I do think that what this reading is describing is that process of maturation, of becoming more fully who we are, a time or the process of coming into our own integrity, our own selves. For me, it speaks directly to this question of what it means to live a life of integrity, the opposing forces that are at play in each of us, creating tension that drives and draws our lives. What voice, what impulse do we listen to, and when, and is there room for both? All of these questions. Does integrity mean, as the Buddha put it in his farewell address to his people? Do you guys know this story? All of his disciples were gathered around the Buddha, and he knew that he was going to be passing away soon. And they were saying, well, who will be our teacher? Who is going to show us the way? And he said, be ye lamps unto yourselves. He told them to follow their own conscience, to trust themselves. But in order to do that, you have to really know yourself. When we engage with that inner light, it's no longer very compelling to I'm going to start that sentence again. When we engage with our inner light, it's no longer very compelling to react to those drives, our parents' needs for us, the messages that we might get from the broader culture, a sibling's benchmarks that they've set ahead of us. There's that sense of obligation to perform for others that no longer really hooks us. When drive arises to reach for something more or go for that promotion or achieve that next goal, whatever it is, to prove our point, to prove ourselves, what does it take to quiet that compulsion and instead ask ourselves, is this something that aligns with my vision of peace? I believe these drives are an impulse to prove our worthiness to ourselves, our parents, anyone in a position of authority. I don't know, something. You guys have them too, I'm sure. And the truth I'm beginning to recognize is that the sense of drive, that compulsion, it ultimately points to the places where I personally have not yet matured. Jack Kornfield again, he says, human beings, when they don't know where they're going, they seem to move ever more quickly toward it. So when we broaden this view out from the personal to the world, right, through a lens, we can witness Western expansion, development, colonialism, industrialization, the digital age, virtual reality, genetically modified organisms. Drive on a personal scale can and is and will be translated to the world stage. So perhaps it's important for us to take some time to get to know ourselves well. More and more, when I feel that familiar sense of drive, this, I need to do it, I gotta show them, I'm so capable, whatever the thing is, I'm finding it to be really suspect. What do I have to prove? I'm not sure. I'm starting to call it into question. What do we as a culture have to prove? Instead, I'm choosing to dedicate myself to a process that looks more like Rilke's unfolding. Rilke writes, I want to unfold. I don't want to stay folded anywhere. Because where I am folded, there I am a lie. So far, what this unfolding has looked like in my own life is a lot of crying. There's been a lot of crying involved. I'm sorry. But I think maybe you need that moisture to get the creases out. It's looked like therapy. It's looked like Al-Anon. It's looked like support groups. It's looked like meditation groups. It's looked like entering this chaplaincy program that I'm in, which I did really as a draw. I had this deep curiosity about end of life because of a couple of experiences that have come up in my own life, and I just had like a strange need to get to know death better. That's weird. Liz Gilbert tells us to follow our curiosity, and I would expand that idea to say that where our curiosity leads, there you will find ultimately your own integrity. Getting curious about ourselves and our worlds means asking the hard questions and staying still long enough to learn the answers. It means planting the seeds of possibility and continuing to nurture them that they might grow. Thoreau explains, though I do not expect a plant to spring up where no seed has been, I have great faith in a seed. Convince me you have a seed there, and I am prepared to expect wonders. Another way of looking at this is to think about following the light. What things call to us, beckon to us? What things are you stretching toward, like those seeds that may or may not fit with the model of your success? I told you the Buddha said, "Be ye lamps unto yourselves, be your own confidence. Hold the truth within yourselves as to the only lamp." I haven't said this yet, but I want to lift up the work that the Challenging Racism group has been doing here in this church. And one of the things that we set out for ourselves was, I guess, another way to express this concept that until we do the work on our own selves, we cannot expect that we will be forces for peace and change in the broader world. It's echoed in our mission statement. Empowered by love, we transform ourselves and serve our world. The love comes first. The transformation arises out of that. And then our world can and will be changed. To everything there's a season, and in this season, let us, each of us, be more concerned with deeply honoring ourselves. Let us listen to the still small voice within, leading us to our curious centers, leading us to take actions, to plant seeds of peace. Let us set down, or at the very least, let us investigate with curiosity and compassion the pressured, driven, grasping that too often and inevitably leads us to enact violence against ourselves, against one another, the planet. Let us be drawn ever closer to the divine truth that we are, each of us, enough, just as we are. Thank you.